Hey guys, tonight we are venturing into the dimly lit, strangely aromatic world of the Renaissance apothecary, a place brimming with exotic ingredients, ancient theories, and potions that promised cures for everything from a common cough to a broken heart, or even the dreaded plague. Imagine stepping off a cobbled street, perhaps in Florence or London, sometime in the 16th century. You push open a heavy wooden door, and a bell jingles. Your senses are immediately overwhelmed by a bewildering array of smells: dried herbs, pungent spices, a faint whiff of something metallic, and perhaps a lingering hint of brimstone or a sweet, cloying perfume. Jars of all shapes and sizes line the shelves, filled with powders, liquids, preserved creatures, and mysterious substances you can't quite identify. This isn't your clean, sterile modern pharmacy. This is a realm of arcane knowledge, where medicine, magic, and a healthy dose of guesswork intertwined. And honestly, if you were suffering from a Renaissance-era ailment and presented with some of the cures we're about to explore, you'd probably opt for a second opinion, or maybe just a stiff drink and a long nap, hoping for the best. Survival was not always guaranteed by the label. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, why not let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is in your corner of the world? It's always fascinating to see how far these stories travel. As of this recording, it's May 16th, 2025 here in my studio. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself standing in this apothecary shop, a space that feels part laboratory, part wizard's den, and part specialty grocery store for the unwell. The apothecary himself, perhaps a stern-looking fellow in a sober gown, peers at you over his spectacles, ready to diagnose your ills, or, more likely, to compound a remedy prescribed by a learned physician. Or perhaps he's a more flamboyant character, eager to sell you his own secret formula, guaranteed to restore your vigor and balance your humors. The line between pharmacist, physician, and entrepreneurial showman could be rather blurry. The air is thick not just with smells, but with the weight of centuries of medical tradition. The theories underpinning these potions stretch back to ancient Greece and Rome, filtered through Arab scholarship and medieval European practice. This isn't a world of randomized controlled trials or peer-reviewed studies. It's a world where authority, the writings of Galen, Hippocrates, Avicenna, often trumped direct observation, and where the composition of your body was believed to mirror the composition of the cosmos. It's complicated, a bit messy, and often, quite frankly, bizarre by our standards. On the shelves, you might see bundles of dried herbs hanging from the rafters: rosemary for memory, lavender for calming the nerves, sage for fevers. In large glass jars, you could spot colorful liquids, tinctures, distillations, cordials. Wooden drawers might contain powdered minerals. Dried animal parts, we'll get to those. Don't you worry. And exotic spices from the East, perhaps a stuffed crocodile or a narwhal tusk passed off as a unicorn horn, naturally hangs from the ceiling, adding to the air of mystery and potency. It's like a Renaissance GNC, but with more eye of newt and less concern about FDA approval. A mainstream historical fact is that Renaissance apothecaries were highly skilled in identifying, sourcing, and preparing a vast range of materia medica. Drawing from botanical, zoological, and mineralogical sources, their knowledge, though based on outdated theories, was often extensive. You've come here seeking relief. Perhaps you have a fever, a melancholic disposition, or a persistent cough. The apothecary listens, nods sagely, and then turns to his pharmacopoeia, his book of recipes and remedies, or draws upon his own well-honed knowledge. What he concocts for you will be a peculiar blend of ancient theory, empirical observation sometimes accurate, sometimes wildly off, and perhaps a dash of pure theater. The potion you eventually receive might be a murky liquid, a sticky electuary, a paste mixed with honey or syrup, or a handful of oddly shaped pills. And what exactly is in that potion? Well, that's what we're here to explore. Ingredient by curious ingredient. So, take a deep breath. Hopefully not too deep. Some of those smells are potent, and let's delve into the fascinating and occasionally frightening contents of Renaissance medicine. Before we can truly appreciate the often baffling ingredients in those Renaissance potions, you need to understand the fundamental theory that governed nearly all medical thought and practice during that era, humoral theory, or humorism. This wasn't some passing fad. It was a comprehensive system for understanding health, disease, and, even personality that originated with ancient Greek physicians like Hippocrates and was extensively developed by Galen of Pergamon in the 2nd century AD. His writings became the bedrock of Western medicine for over 500 years, right through the Renaissance and beyond. So, if you walked into that apothecary shop complaining of an ailment, the first thing the physician or apothecary would be thinking about is which of your humors is out of whack. The core idea of humoral theory is that the human body contains 4 fundamental fluids, or humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile or choler, and black bile or melancholy. Each of these humors was associated with one of the 4 classical elements: air, water, fire, and earth, respectively. 2 of the 4 qualities: hot, cold, moist, dry, a particular season, and even specific organs. For example, might a blood was associated with air, considered hot and moist, linked to springtime, and thought to be produced by the liver. Phlegm was linked to water, cold and moist, associated with winter, and connected to the brain and lungs. Yellow bile was fire, hot and dry, summer, and produced by the gallbladder. And black bile was earth, cold and dry, autumn, and associated with the spleen. It's a beautifully symmetrical system, like a very complicated game of elemental rock, paper, scissors played inside your body. According to this theory, perfect health resulted from these 4 humors being in perfect balance. A state called eucrasia, illness, or dyscrasia occurred when one or more of the humors was deficient, or more commonly, in excess, or when they were somehow corrupted or not properly mixed. The physician's primary goal, therefore, was to identify which humor was causing the problem and then restore the balance. This could be done in various ways: by diet, by lifestyle changes, by purging the excess humor through bloodletting, enemas or emetics that made you vomit. Lovely. Or by administering medicines designed to counteract the imbalance. A mainstream historical fact is that Galen's humoral theory was so dominant that it formed the basis of medical education and practice in European universities for centuries, with medical students meticulously studying his voluminous texts. So, if you presented with a fever, redness, and a rapid pulse, the physician might diagnose an excess of blood, a sanguine condition, and prescribe bloodletting, along with cooling and moistening foods and herbs. If you were pale, lethargic, and coughed up a lot of, phlegm, you might be deemed to have an excess of that humor, a phlegmatic condition, requiring warming and drying remedies. An irritable, flushed, and aggressive person might be suffering from too much yellow bile, a choleric temperament, needing cooling and calming treatments. And if you were sad, withdrawn, and contemplative, you were clearly afflicted by an excess of black bile, a melancholic temperament, for which warming, moistening, and cheering remedies might be prescribed. It's where we get our modern terms like sanguine, phlegmatic, choleric, and melancholic to describe personalities, a direct linguistic legacy of this ancient theory. The properties of medicinal ingredients, herbs, minerals, animal parts, were also classified according to their supposed humoral qualities. A plant might be considered hot and dry in the 3rd degree, or cold and moist in the 2nd degree. The physician or apothecary would then select ingredients with properties opposite to the presumed imbalance to try and restore equilibrium. For instance, if you had a hot disease, you'd be given cold remedies. It sounds simple, but the gradations and combinations could become incredibly complex. It was like a cosmic culinary balancing act. Too much fire in this patient. Jeeves, fetch me the cucumber-infused dew of a winter's morn, and hold the chili peppers. Now for a quirky tidbit, some Renaissance physicians took humoral theory to extreme lengths, even diagnosing lovesickness as a specific humoral imbalance, often an overheating of the blood or an excess of black bile, leading to obsessive thoughts and erratic behavior. Prescribed cures might involve cooling baths, listening to calming music, or even, in some cases, trying to arrange a meeting with the object of affection or a suitable distraction. Historians still argue about the extent to which humoral theory actually helped or hindered medical progress. While it provided a comprehensive framework for understanding illness, its rigid adherence to ancient authority and its often incorrect physiological assumptions arguably prevented more empirical or scientific approaches from taking root earlier. So, as you await your Renaissance potion, remember that its ingredients have likely been chosen based on this intricate, ancient, and, to our modern eyes, deeply flawed system of balancing your internal juices, the herbs, the minerals, the strange animal bits. They all have a humoral job to do, at least in theory. Whether they actually did that job, or did something else entirely or nothing at all, is another story altogether. Now that you have a basic grasp of the all-encompassing humoral theory, that delicate dance of blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile supposedly sloshing around inside you, let's turn our attention to the most common and arguably most sensible category of ingredients found in those Renaissance potions herbs. The Renaissance apothecary's shop would have been overwhelmingly fragrant with the scent of dried botanicals. From common garden plants to exotic imports, herbs formed the backbone of most medicinal preparations. Their use rooted in centuries, even millennia, of empirical observation and traditional knowledge, all neatly or sometimes not so neatly shoehorned into the humoral framework. You'd see bundles of herbs hanging from the rafters to dry, their colors muted but their scents still potent. Drawers and jars would be filled with leaves, flowers, seeds, roots, and barks, each believed to possess specific medicinal virtues. A skilled apothecary needed to be an expert botanist, able to identify hundreds of different plants, know where and when to harvest them for maximum potency, and understand how to prepare them correctly. It wasn't just a matter of randomly chucking some weeds into a pot. There was a genuine, if sometimes misguided, science to it. A mainstream historical fact is that numerous illustrated herbals, detailed books describing plants and their medicinal uses, were published during the Renaissance, such as those by Leonhard Fuchs or Pier Andrea Mattioli. These were vital reference works for physicians and apothecaries, combining classical knowledge with new discoveries. What kind of herbs might you find in your potion? Well, it would depend entirely on your ailment, as diagnosed through the humoral lens. If you were suffering from melancholy and excess of cold, dry black bile, your potion might include warming and moistening herbs. Borage and bug loss were famously recommended to make men merry and drive away sadness. Rosemary, considered hot and dry, was thought to strengthen the brain and memory, and comfort the heart. Perhaps a dash of thyme or marjoram for their warming qualities. It's like your Renaissance physician was trying to give your internal thermostat a little nudge and maybe spritz you with some herbal air freshener for the soul. For fevers, often attributed to an excess of heat choler or blood, cooling herbs would be employed. Willow bark, containing salicin, a precursor to aspirin, has been used for millennia to reduce fever and pain, and Renaissance apothecaries certainly knew its value. Chickweed, plantain, and violet leaves were also considered cooling and soothing. A potion for a fever might be a rather bitter brew, but if it brought your temperature down, you probably wouldn't complain too much. Or maybe you would, but at least you'd be a cooler complainant. Digestive troubles. Peppermint, chamomile, and fennel were your friends. Believed to settle the stomach, expel wind, a major concern in humoral theory, as trapped vapors could cause all sorts of problems, and aid digestion. For coughs and lung complaints often linked to an excess of phlegm, expectorant herbs like elecampane root, horehound, or coltsfoot might be included, aiming to cut the thick phlegm and help you expel it. Sounds delightful, doesn't it? Like a herbal drain cleaner for your chest? Many herbs were also chosen for their purgative qualities, to cleanse the body of those pesky excess humors. Senna, rhubarb root, and aloes were powerful laxatives, while herbs like hellebore highly toxic and used with extreme caution, if at all by responsible practitioners, could be used as emetics to induce vomiting. The Renaissance approach to healthcare often involved a good spring cleaning of the insides, whether you felt you needed it or not. Now, for a quirky tidbit, some herbs were valued not just for their direct medicinal effects, but for their supposed sympathetic or magical properties, often linked to astrology. For example, plants ruled by the sun, like calendula or St. John's wort, might be used for heart conditions or to promote vitality. Plants ruled by Mars might be used for injuries or to treat aggressive humors. The timing of harvesting, guided by planetary hours, could also be considered crucial for maximizing a herb's potency. Historians still argue about the balance between empirical knowledge of herbal effects and the influence of magical or astrological beliefs in Renaissance pharmacy. Were apothecaries primarily relying on what they observed to work, or were they deeply invested in these more esoteric correspondences? Likely a bit of both, creating a wonderfully muddled yet fascinating pharmacopoeia. So, when that Renaissance apothecary hands you a vial of murky liquid, remember that a significant portion of it is likely a carefully chosen cocktail of plant extracts. Some of these herbs, we now know through modern science, do indeed possess genuine pharmacological properties. Others were probably useless, and a few might have been actively harmful. It was a herbal lottery, but one based on a long and venerable tradition of looking to the green gold of the plant kingdom for healing. All right, you've braced yourself for a potion, likely brimming with various herbs, some helpful, some hopeful. But the Renaissance apothecary's shelf of curiosities doesn't stop at the botanical. Prepare yourself, because we're now venturing into the often unsettling, occasionally stomach-churning, and frankly bizarre realm of animal-derived ingredients. Yes, creatures great and small, or at least bits of them, frequently found their way into those peculiar medical concoctions, based on a mixture of ancient tradition, folklore, and some truly imaginative interpretations of medicinal properties. If you thought a bitter herbal brew was bad, just wait until you hear what else might be lurking in your vial. The use of animal parts in medicine was by no means new to the Renaissance. It had ancient roots. But the Renaissance, with its renewed interest in classical texts and its burgeoning global trade bringing exotic animal products to European shores, saw a flourishing of these creature cures. The guiding principles were often based on the doctrine of signatures, which we'll explore more later. The idea that like cures like, or that a substance's appearance hints at its use, or on the perceived characteristics of the animal itself. A strong, brave lion. Its heart might be used to instill courage. A swift deer. Parts of it might be used for agility or to treat ailments affecting the legs. It's like trying to absorb an animal's superpower by ingesting a bit of it. Not quite how biology works, but hey, they were trying. So, what kind of animal ingredients might you encounter? Let's start with something relatively tame, yet still a bit odd: castrium. This was a secretion from the scent glands of beavers, with a strong, musky odor. It was used for a wide range of ailments, including headaches, epilepsy, and hysteria, often based on its supposed ability to calm the nerves or expel vapors from the brain. Then there was powdered staghorn, believed to be restorative and to counteract poisons. A mainstream historical fact is that many official pharmacopoeias of the Renaissance listed numerous animal-derived substances, with precise instructions for their preparation and use, indicating their acceptance within mainstream medical practice, however strange they seem to us. Now, let's get a little weirder. How about some woodlice, also known as pill bugs or sow bugs? Yes, those little gray crustaceans you find under damp logs. Crushed or powdered, they were prescribed for jaundice, urinary problems, and even tuberculosis, perhaps because they roll up into a little pill shape. A rather literal interpretation of the doctrine of signatures. Earthworms, too, were on the menu, often prepared in oils or ointments for sprains, burns, or aching joints. Feeling a bit queasy yet, we're just getting warmed up. Viper flesh was a highly prized ingredient, especially in complex cure-alls like theriac, more on that later. Vipers, being venomous, were thought by a kind of homeopathic logic to contain powerful antidotes. Their flesh, often dried and powdered, or made into atrocious lozenges, was believed to be a potent remedy against poisons, plague, and various skin diseases. Preparing the viper was a specific process, often involving removing the head, tail, and entrails before drying and aging the flesh. You wouldn't want any of the really bad bits in your anti-plague snack, would you? And then there's the truly exotic, or the downright ghoulish. Powdered mummy. Yes, actual ground-up ancient Egyptian mummy was a highly valued and very expensive ingredient, imported from Egypt and believed to have powerful healing properties for everything from bruises to epilepsy. It was thought to contain mumia, a mythical black bitumen-like substance with miraculous powers. The trade in mummies for medicinal purposes was a rather grim business, leading to the destruction of many ancient tombs. Remember that crocodile dung sunscreen we might have joked about in another context? Well, this is arguably in a similar league of things you really hope aren't in your medicine. Unicorn horn, or what was sold as such usually narwhal tusks, or even rhinoceros horn, was another incredibly expensive and sought-after ingredient, believed to detect and neutralize poisons, purify water, and cure various diseases. It would be scraped or powdered and added to potions for the very wealthy. Pearls, coral, and crab's eyes, actually gastroliths from crayfish, were also ground up and used for their supposed absorbent, purifying, or strengthening properties. Now, for a quirky tidbit, some remedies called for live animals to be used in rather unsettling ways. For instance, to treat gout, it was sometimes recommended to cut a live puppy in half and apply its warm innards to the afflicted joint. Thankfully, such extreme and cruel practices were likely less common than the use of dried or powdered parts. But they illustrate the sometimes desperate and often bizarre nature of Renaissance therapeutics. Historians still argue about the efficacy of these animal-based remedies, while some, like honey, a bee product, clearly have beneficial properties. The vast majority were likely useless or even harmful. Their perceived effects often due to the placebo response or the natural course of the illness, rather than any inherent medicinal virtue of the powdered lizard or beetle. So, as you contemplate your Renaissance potion, be aware that lurking amongst the herbs could be a dash of staghorn, a suspicion of woodlouse, or, if you were very wealthy and very ill, a pinch of powdered mummy or unicorn horn. It certainly makes modern medicine, with its clearly labeled ingredients and clinical trials, seem rather appealing, doesn't it? Having navigated the fragrant aisles of the herbal section and braved the rather unsettling cabinet of creature cures, your Renaissance apothecary still has more wonders and potential horrors in store for you. We now turn our attention to the mineral kingdom, the rocks, metals, and gemstones that were also frequently ground, dissolved, or otherwise processed to find their way into those peculiar medical potions. The belief that the earth itself held powerful remedies was ancient, and Renaissance practitioners, often influenced by alchemical thought, were eager to unlock these terrestrial secrets for healing. Some of these mineral ingredients were relatively benign, others were dangerously toxic. Let's start with some of the more common, and generally safer, Mineral components. Clays like Armenian bole, a reddish clay rich in iron oxide, were often used internally to absorb toxins or treat diarrhea, and externally as poultices for wounds or inflammation. Chalk and powdered coral, which, while animal-derived, was often classified with minerals due to its stony nature, were used as antacids or to sweeten the humors. Sulfur, in various forms, was used both internally and externally for skin conditions like scabies or leprosy, and its fumes were sometimes used for fumigation during plagues. These substances, at least, had some basis in either observable absorbent properties or, in the case of sulfur, antimicrobial effects, even if the underlying theory was humoral. It's like using calamine lotion today, a mineral-based soother, but then we get into the heavy hitters. Quite literally metals: mercury, lead, arsenic, and antimony were all used medicinally during the Renaissance, often with devastating consequences. A mainstream historical fact is that mercury compounds, such as mercuric chloride or calomel mercurous chloride, were widely used to treat syphilis, a disease that was rampant in Europe from the late 15th century. While mercury did have some effect on the spirochete bacterium that causes syphilis, it was also incredibly toxic, leading to severe side effects like tooth loss, kidney damage, neurological problems, and even death. The cure could often be worse than the disease. Patients undergoing mercury treatment would suffer profuse salivation, which was seen as a sign that the evil humors were being expelled. Delightful. Antimony, another toxic metallic element, was also a popular and controversial remedy. It was often administered in the form of antimony cups, cups made from antimony from which wine would be drunk. The acid in the wine would leach small amounts of antimony into the drink, which would then act as a powerful emetic and purgative. The idea was to violently cleanse the body of impurities. It was also used to make everlasting pills, small balls of metallic antimony that would pass through the digestive system, supposedly purging it, and could then be retrieved, washed one hopes very thoroughly, and reused. Talk about recycling. This is one hand-me-down you definitely wouldn't want. Lead compounds, such as lead acetate, known as sugar of lead for its sweet taste, yikes, were used externally for ointments and internally for various ailments. Despite lead's well-known toxicity, arsenic, a notorious poison, was also used in minute quantities in some tonics and potions, believed to have alterative or strengthening properties. It's a fine line between a microdose and a macro disaster. Gemstones, too, were thought to possess potent medicinal virtues, though their use was largely confined to the wealthy due to their expense. Pearls, as mentioned, were powdered and used in cordials to strengthen the heart and lift the spirits. Emeralds were believed to benefit eyesight and cure dysentery. Sapphires were thought to cool fevers and act as an antidote to poison. Rubies were associated with blood and vitality. These precious stones would be ground into a fine powder, a difficult task in itself, and mixed into potions or electuaries. The efficacy was likely nil, but the placebo effect of swallowing something so expensive must have been considerable. I just drank a potion with powdered diamonds. I must be feeling better. Now for a quirky tidbit, alchemical principles heavily influence the use of some minerals. Gold, for instance, was considered the most perfect metal associated with the sun and incorruptibility. Potable gold, aurum potabile, a colloidal solution or suspension of gold, was a highly sought after and incredibly expensive. Elixir believed to prolong life, cure all diseases, and restore youth. The recipes for making it were complex and shrouded in secrecy, often involving strong acids and elaborate distillations. Historians still argue about the extent to which practicing physicians and apothecaries genuinely believed in the literal efficacy of these gemstone and precious metal remedies, or if their inclusion was more about catering to the expectations of wealthy patients who desired rare and costly treatments. Was it medicine, magic, or just very expensive marketing? So, when your Renaissance apothecary presents you with a potion, it might contain not just herbs and bits of animals, but also a dash of powdered pearl, a hint of clay, or, if you're particularly unlucky or suffering from certain ailments, a trace of mercury or antimony. The earth itself was a vast medicine chest, full of treasures and terrifying toxins, and Renaissance practitioners were determined to explore its every nook and cranny in their quest for cures. Just be glad we now have better ways to check the ingredients list. You're standing in that Renaissance apothecary shop, surrounded by jars of dried herbs, mysterious animal parts, and intriguing mineral powders. While many of these ingredients could be sourced locally, herbs from a nearby garden or forest, common minerals from a local quarry, some of the most prized, potent, and often most expensive components in those peculiar potions arrived via long, arduous, and incredibly lucrative trade routes. The Renaissance was an age of burgeoning global exploration and commerce, and this brought a dazzling array of exotic spices, resins, gums, and other materia medica from Asia, Africa, and the newly discovered Americas to the apothecaries' shelves in Europe. These foreign treasures were believed to possess extraordinary medicinal virtues, often enhanced by their rarity and exotic origins. Imagine the journey of a peppercorn or a stick of cinnamon. Grown in distant lands like India, Sri Lanka, or the spice islands, the Moluccas in Indonesia, these spices would be harvested, processed, and then embark on a perilous multi-stage journey. They might travel overland by caravan along segments of the Silk Road, or by sea across the Indian Ocean, through the Red Sea or the Persian Gulf, often passing through the hands of numerous Arab, Persian, Venetian, and Genoese middlemen, each adding their markup. By the time a peppercorn reached your apothecary in London or Florence, its price could be astronomical, making spices not just culinary flavorings but also valuable commodities used in medicine. A mainstream historical fact is that spices like pepper, plus cloves, nutmeg, mace, ginger, and cinnamon were highly valued in Renaissance medicine for their warming and stimulating properties, believed to aid digestion, dispel cold humors, and act as preservatives in medicinal compounds. Resins and gums from exotic trees were also key ingredients. Frankincense and myrrh, famed since antiquity and sourced from Arabia and Northeast Africa, were used not only as incense but also in potions and ointments for their supposed antiseptic, anti-inflammatory, and wound-healing properties. Gum benzoin from Southeast Asia, camphor from China and Borneo, and various balsams were also imported, prized for their aromatic qualities and their use in treating respiratory ailments or skin conditions. These substances often arrived as sticky, resinous tears or blocks, their potent aromas filling the apothecary shop with the scent of faraway lands. It's like unboxing a delivery from an exotic online spice merchant, but with a much higher chance of it being prescribed for your ague from the Americas. Though their impact was more gradual, new botanicals began to arrive. Guaiacum wood lignum vitae, or wood of life, from the Caribbean was famously, though largely ineffectively, used as a treatment for syphilis. Cinchona bark from Peru, containing quinine, would later prove to be a genuine remedy for malaria, though its widespread adoption took time. Sarsaparilla and sassafras were other New World plants that found their way into European pharmacopoeias, often touted as blood purifiers or treatments for various ailments. The apothecary's world was constantly expanding, his shelves slowly reflecting the ever-widening map of global trade. These exotic ingredients were not just medically significant, they were also status symbols. A potion containing rare spices from the East or newly discovered herbs from the Americas would be considerably more expensive, and therefore more appealing to wealthy patrons who wanted the best or at least the most exclusive treatments available. The mystique of a far-off origin often added to an ingredient's perceived potency. If it came from halfway around the world and cost a fortune, it must be powerful. Right. This is the kind of logic that still sells a lot of high-end cosmetics. Now for a quirky tidbit The adulteration of these expensive imported ingredients was a common problem. Unscrupulous merchants or even apothecaries might mix costly spices with cheaper substitutes or sell inferior quality resins. There were attempts to regulate the trade and ensure quality, with guilds and city authorities sometimes inspecting goods, but it was a constant battle. You might be paying for precious saffron used as a cordial and to cheer the heart, but getting mostly safflower or marigold petals. Caveat emptor. Let the potion drinker beware. Historians still argue about the true extent to which the influx of these new, exotic ingredients fundamentally changed European medical practice during the Renaissance itself. Versus simply being incorporated into existing humoral theories and traditional formulas, were they genuine game changers or just new toys for an old system? So, when you receive that complex Renaissance potion, some of its more pungent or unusual notes might be thanks to these global trade winds. A pinch of ginger from India, a dash of camphor from Borneo, a sliver of guaiacum from the Americas, all painstakingly transported across continents and oceans to end up in your little vial. These ingredients connected your local apothecary, and by extension you, the patient, to a vast interconnected world of commerce, exploration, and the eternal human quest for health and healing. No matter how peculiar the path, among the myriad potions and remedies lining the Renaissance apothecary's shelves, none were more complex, more famous, or more steeped in myth and tradition than the great panaceas or cure-alls. Chief among them, theriac and mithridate, these weren't simple herbal infusions. They were astonishingly elaborate concoctions, sometimes containing dozens, even hundreds, of ingredients, each meticulously weighed and combined according to ancient recipes. They were the superstars of the pharmaceutical world, believed to be universal antidotes against poisons, protectors against plague, and remedies for a vast range of ailments. If a Renaissance potion were a rock band, theriac would be the multi-instrumental prog rock epic that lasts for 3 hours. The origins of these grand compositions lie in antiquity. Mithridate was reputedly invented by King Mithridates VI of Pontus in the 1st century BC, who was said to have experimented with poisons and developed this complex antidote to protect himself. Theriac, from the Greek therion, meaning wild or venomous beast, was an even older concept, originally a remedy for animal bites, but it was famously reformulated and expanded by Andromachus the Elder, physician to the Roman Emperor Nero in the 1st century AD. His version, known as Theriac of Andromachus or Venetian theriac as Venice, later became a major center for its production, became the gold standard. A mainstream historical fact is that recipes for theriac and mithridate were included in official pharmacopoeias across Europe for centuries, and their public preparation was often a significant civic event, supervised by physicians and city officials to ensure authenticity and quality. What exactly went into these legendary compounds? The lists of ingredients are mind-boggling. Viper's flesh, as we've mentioned, was a key component in theriac, believed to provide its anti-venom properties. Opium was another crucial and highly active ingredient, providing pain relief, sedation, and a sense of well-being or, addiction. Beyond these headliners, there would be a vast array of exotic spices like cinnamon, cardamom, cloves, and pepper, aromatic resins such as myrrh, frankincense, and galbanum, numerous medicinal herbs like gentian root, valerian, rhubarb, and licorice, minerals like Armenian bole, and sometimes even stranger additions like castor beaver scrotum secretions, dried skinks, a type of lizard, and asphalt. The exact number of ingredients could vary, but some recipes for theriac listed over 60 or 70 components, all to be finely powdered or processed, and then mixed with honey to form a thick electuary or paste. The rationale behind such complexity was multifaceted. Partly, and it was the idea of shotgun therapy. If you include enough different ingredients, surely something in there will work against the disease or poison. Each ingredient was also chosen for its specific humoral properties. aiming to create a perfectly balanced compound that could counteract a wide range of imbalances. And, of course, the sheer complexity and the inclusion of rare and expensive ingredients added to the mystique and perceived potency of the remedy. If it took a year to gather all the bits and pieces and cost a king's ransom, it had to be powerful, right? It's the ultimate kitchen sink approach to medicine, but with more powdered viper and less actual sink. The preparation of theriac was a lengthy and elaborate process, sometimes taking months or even years, as some ingredients needed to be aged or specially treated. When it was finally compounded, often in a public ceremony to assure consumers of its authenticity, it was then aged for a considerable period, sometimes several years before being deemed ready for use. This aging process was thought to allow the ingredients to meld and mature, increasing the efficacy of the final product. Now, for a quirky tidbit because of the inclusion of opium, theriac and mithridate were undoubtedly effective in relieving pain, suppressing coughs, and inducing a sense of calm or euphoria. This very real sedative and analgesic effect likely contributed significantly to their enduring reputation as powerful remedies. Even if many of their other ingredients were inert or their underlying theory flawed. It's easier to believe a medicine is working if it makes you feel sleepy and a bit floaty. Historians still argue about the precise recipes and variations of theriac used in different cities and by different apothecaries. While official pharmacopoeias tried to standardize the formula, local availability of ingredients and individual preferences likely led to considerable diversity in these complex compounds. So, if your Renaissance physician prescribed theriac, you were getting a veritable symphony or perhaps a cacophony of ingredients. A concoction that represented the pinnacle of ancient and medieval polypharmacy. It was expensive. It was mysterious. It was packed with everything but the kitchen sink unless the sink was made of dried beaver gland, in which case it might be in there too. And thanks to the opium, it probably made you feel something. Whether that something was actual healing or just a pleasant narcotic haze is a matter for another, much longer dream. While the grand, complex, and often bizarre concoctions like theriac, rooted in ancient Galenic tradition, continue to dominate the apothecary's shelves, the Renaissance was also an era of intellectual ferment and challenge to old authorities. And in the world of medicine and pharmacy, one of the most radical and influential figures to emerge was a Swiss-German physician, alchemist, and philosopher named Theophrastus von Hohenheim, better known as Paracelsus. Active in the first half of the 16th century, Paracelsus launched a fiery assault on the established medical orthodoxies, advocating for a new approach to understanding and treating disease, one that emphasized direct observation, experience, and, crucially, the use of chemically prepared medicines rather than just complex herbal mixtures. He was the enfant terrible of Renaissance medicine, and his ideas, while controversial, helped pave the way for a more chemical approach to pharmacy. Paracelsus famously burned the works of Galen and Avicenna in a public bonfire, a dramatic gesture symbolizing his rejection of blind adherence to ancient authorities. He believed that true knowledge came from experience and from studying the book of nature, not just from dusty old texts. He argued that the purpose of alchemy was not merely to transmute base metals into gold, but to prepare potent medicines. He introduced the idea of the tria prima, salt, sulfur, and mercury, as fundamental principles underlying all matter, including the human body, and believed that disease resulted from imbalances in these three principles. This was a significant departure from the four humors of Galenic theory. It's like he was trying to reboot the entire operating system of medicine. Forget your blood and phlegm, he might have said. It's all about the salt, sulfur, and mercury. Baby. He probably didn't say baby. One of Paracelsus's key contributions was his emphasis on extracting the essence or virtue of a medicinal substance, often through chemical processes like distillation, sublimation, or the use of strong solvents like alcohol, which he called the quinta essentia, or fifth essence. He believed that by isolating the active principle of a plant or mineral, one could create a more potent and targeted remedy. This was a revolutionary idea at a time when most medicines were whole herb preparations or complex mixtures where the specific action of individual components was poorly understood. A mainstream historical fact is that Paracelsus and his followers, known as Paracelsians or iatrochemists, chemical physicians, were pioneers in the use of metallic and mineral-based medicines, including compounds of antimony, arsenic, mercury, iron, and lead, prepared through specific alchemical processes. For example, Paracelsus advocated for the use of laudanum, an alcoholic tincture of opium, which became a widely used and highly effective, though obviously addictive painkiller and sedative for centuries. While opium itself was a component of older remedies like theriac, Paracelsus focused on extracting its specific virtues in a concentrated form. He also experimented with metal-based remedies, believing that if properly prepared and administered in minute doses, even poisons could be transformed into powerful medicines. His famous dictum was, "All things are poison, and nothing is without poison. The dosage alone makes it so a thing is not a poison." This is a fundamental principle of toxicology, but in the hands of less skilled practitioners, it could be a recipe for disaster. Remember those mercury and antimony cures? Paracelsus was a big fan, though he stressed the importance of proper chemical preparation to mitigate their toxicity and enhance their efficacy. His approach was not without its fierce critics. Traditional Galenic physicians viewed him as a dangerous charlatan, an arrogant upstart who was discarding centuries of accumulated medical wisdom in favor of his own untested and often incomprehensible theories. The Paracelsians, in turn, dismissed the Galenists as slaves to outdated dogma, their complex herbal mixtures as ineffective slop jar medicine. The battle between these two schools of thought would rage for generations, profoundly shaping the future direction of medicine and pharmacy. Now, for a quirky tidbit, Paracelsus was a famously eccentric and itinerant figure. He dressed in simple clothes, often fraternized with common folk like miners and barbers, from whom he believed he could learn practical knowledge, and wrote in a bombastic, often obscure style, mixing German with Latin and coining many new terms. He was definitely not your typical university-trained, gown-wearing physician of the era. He was more like a rock star of Renaissance rebellion, smashing medical idols. Historians still argue about the true extent of Paracelsus's originality versus his debt to earlier alchemical and folk medical traditions. Was he a lone genius, or more of a synthesizer and popularizer of existing, less mainstream ideas? So, as you stand in that Renaissance apothecary shop, you might see evidence of this growing Paracelsian influence. Perhaps there are new types of distilled waters, chemical tinctures, or mineral-based powders appearing on the shelves alongside the traditional herbal bundles and jars of theriac. The air might carry the faint, sharp tang of alchemical experiments. Paracelsus and his followers were ushering in a new, more interventionist, and often more potent for better or worse era of medicine. One where the secrets of healing were sought not just in the balance of humors, but in the very chemical essence of things. The potions were getting an upgrade, or at least a very different kind of recipe. Amidst the grand theories of humoral balance and the emerging chemical philosophies of Paracelsus, another curious and rather charming principle guided the selection of many ingredients for Renaissance potions, the doctrine of signatures. This belief, which had roots in ancient folk wisdom but was articulated more formally by writers like Paracelsus himself and later by figures such as Giambattista della Porta, held that God in his infinite wisdom and benevolence had imprinted signatures or visual clues onto plants, animals, and minerals that indicated their specific medicinal uses. In other words, an object's appearance, its shape, color, texture, or even where it grew, was a divine hint, a label from the Almighty, telling you which part of the body it was meant to heal or what ailment it could cure. It's like Mother Nature running a very literal pharmacy where the walnuts look like brains because they are brain food. So, how did this work in practice? If a plant had leaves shaped like a human liver, such as hepatica liverwort, it was naturally assumed to be a remedy for liver ailments. Plants with heart-shaped leaves or flowers, like some species of violets or borage that were thought to be good for heart conditions or to cheer the heart. Kidney beans, with their obvious resemblance to kidneys, were prescribed for urinary and kidney problems. Eyebright, a small flower with markings that vaguely resembled an eye, was, you guessed it, a popular remedy for eye infections and poor vision. It's a delightfully straightforward and if somewhat naive system of medical correspondence. This rock looks a bit like a diseased spleen. Apothecary? Got anything for that? The color of a plant or mineral could also be a signature. Yellow-flowered plants, like celandine, whose juice is yellow, or yellow minerals like sulfur, were often used to treat jaundice, a condition characterized by yellowing of the skin and eyes. Red plants, like beets or roses, or red gemstones like rubies, were associated with blood and might be used for blood disorders, to stop bleeding, or to improve circulation. It's a very visual pharmacopoeia where the cure literally mirrors the complaint or the organ in distress. Even the environment where a plant grew could be a clue. Plants that thrived in watery or marshy areas, like willow or marshmallow, were often thought to be good for ailments associated with excess phlegm or watery humors, such as coughs, colds, or rheumatic conditions. Plants with long roots might be considered good for strengthening the roots of the body or for conditions affecting the lower limbs. A mainstream historical fact is that the doctrine of signatures was a widespread concept in European folk medicine and was formally expounded in several influential Renaissance texts, providing a seemingly logical, divinely ordained framework for identifying medicinal properties. Now, for a quirky tidbit, this doctrine could lead to some rather imaginative and occasionally disturbing associations. For instance, the mandrake root, which sometimes has a forked shape vaguely resembling a human form, was surrounded by a host of superstitions and was believed to possess powerful magical and medicinal properties, including promoting fertility or acting as an aphrodisiac. Its human shape was a clear signature of its power over the human body. Similarly, some orchids, whose tubers resembled testicles, the word orchid itself comes from the Greek word for testicle, were used to treat male sexual ailments or to enhance virility. You can see how this line of thinking could get a bit literal. Historians still argue about whether the doctrine of signatures was a primary system for discovering new remedies, or more of a mnemonic device, or a way of retrospectively justifying the use of already known traditional medicines. Did people truly believe a plant worked because it looked like a lung? Or did they observe it worked for lung issues and then notice its lung-like appearance as a confirmation? Imagine the Renaissance apothecary or a village herbalist wandering through the fields and forests, their eyes peeled for these divine clues. Aha, they might exclaim, spotting a plant with spotted leaves that resemble diseased lungs. Clearly, this is a remedy for consumption. It added a layer of spiritual significance and discovery to the practice of herbalism. It wasn't just about random trial and error, it was about deciphering God's own handbook, written in the language of leaves, roots, and stones. Of course, from a modern scientific perspective, the doctrine of signatures is pure fancy. There's no inherent connection between a plant's shape and its pharmacological effects. However, by chance, some plants identified through this doctrine did possess genuine medicinal properties like willow bark, which resembles a flexible limb and helps with joint pain, also containing saligan. But many others were useless or even harmful, their use based solely on these superficial resemblances. So, when you consider the ingredients in your Renaissance potion, remember that some of them might have been chosen not for their proven efficacy or their humoral properties, but simply because they looked the part. It's a charming, If medically unreliable an example of humanity's enduring quest to find meaning and order in the natural world, even if it means seeing a cure for baldness in a hairy caterpillar that's a hypothetical. By the way, please don't try it. You're back in that Renaissance apothecary shop, perhaps with a physician's prescription in hand. Or maybe you're relying on the apothecary's own diagnostic skills. The ingredients for your peculiar potion have been selected, a complex blend of herbs chosen for their humoral properties, perhaps a dash of powdered staghorn for strength, a hint of lapis lazuli for its celestial virtues, or a plant that looks suspiciously like your afflicted organ. Thanks to the doctrine of signatures, now comes the crucial stage, the actual preparation. This wasn't just a matter of chucking everything into a bottle and giving it a shake. The Renaissance apothecary was a skilled craftsman, employing a range of techniques: pounding, grinding, infusing, decocting, distilling, and more, to transform raw materia medica into a palatable or at least administrable remedy. The first step for many ingredients, especially dried herbs, roots, barks, minerals, and some animal parts, was pulverization. You'd hear the rhythmic thump of a large mortar and pestle, often made of bronze, stone, or lignum vitae, a very hard wood. The apothecary or his apprentice would painstakingly grind the substances into a fine powder. This increased the surface area, making it easier to extract the desired properties or mix them evenly into a compound. For harder substances, specialized grinding stones or mills might be used. It was dusty, strenuous work, the foundation of many medicinal preparations. Think of it as the 16th century equivalent of a very manual food processor, but probably with more chanting to ward off evil spirits during the process. Once powdered, ingredients could be combined in various ways. For liquid remedies, infusions and decoctions were common. An infusion involved steeping the herbs or other materials in hot water, much like making tea, to extract their water-soluble components. A decoction was a more robust process, where the ingredients were boiled in water for a longer period, often used for tougher materials like roots or barks, to extract a stronger brew. These liquids might then be strained and sweetened with honey or sugar to make them more palatable, as many medicinal herbs are quite bitter. A mainstream historical fact is that apothecaries used a variety of specialized equipment, including alembics for distillation, presses for extracting oils or juices, and carefully calibrated scales and measures to ensure, at least in theory, the correct proportions of ingredients in complex formulas. Distillation was a particularly important technique, especially influenced by alchemical practices and the Paracelsian emphasis on extracting essences. Using an alembic, still consisting of a heated pot, a cap, and a condensing tube, apothecaries could produce distilled waters, hydrosols from aromatic plants like roses or lavender, or create concentrated alcoholic tinctures. Alcohol was a powerful solvent, capable of extracting different compounds from plants than water alone. These spirits, or quintessences, were considered highly potent. The gentle gurgle of the alembic and the fragrant steam wafting through the shop would have been common sensory experiences. It's like a micro-distillery, but for health elixirs instead of artisanal gin. For semi-solid preparations, electuaries were very popular. These were medicinal pastes made by mixing powdered ingredients with honey, syrup, or fruit pulp. They were easier to take than bitter powders or liquids, and the honey or sugar also acted as a preservative. Pills pilulae were made by rolling a stiff paste of powdered drugs and a binding agent like gum tragacanth or licorice root extract into small spheres, which were then often coated with sugar, gold leaf for the wealthy, or cinnamon powder to mask the taste or improve their appearance. Making uniformly sized pills by hand was a skill in itself. Ointments, salves, and plasters were prepared for external application. These typically involved mixing medicinal powders or extracts with a fatty base like lard, beeswax, or olive oil. The ingredients would be carefully heated and stirred to create a smooth, homogeneous mixture. These were used for wounds, skin diseases, aches, and pains. You might find the apothecary carefully spreading a freshly made plaster onto a piece of leather or cloth, ready for application. Now for a quirky tidbit, the color and even the smell of a potion were often considered important indicators of its quality and efficacy. A brightly colored cordial or a particularly fragrant ointment might be seen as more potent. Apothecaries sometimes added harmless or not so harmless coloring agents like cochineal for red or saffron for yellow to enhance the visual appeal of their preparations. After all, if your medicine looks and smells like something dredged from a swamp, you're less likely to believe it's doing you any good, even if it contains powdered unicorn horn. Historians still argue about the level of standardization in these preparations. While official pharmacopoeias provided recipes, did individual apothecaries frequently alter them based on ingredient availability, personal experience, or the specific demands of their clientele? So, behind the counter of that Renaissance apothecary shop, a constant process of transformation was underway. Raw, sometimes unpromising, ingredients were being pounded, brewed, distilled, and mixed with considerable skill and artistry, all to create the potions and pills that people relied on for their health and well-being. It was a hands-on, labor-intensive craft, a world away from the mass-produced pharmaceuticals of today, but one that laid some of the crucial groundwork for the chemical and pharmaceutical sciences to come. You've stepped into the Renaissance apothecary's domain. Observed the curious ingredients and perhaps even witnessed the meticulous preparation of a potion. But who exactly are you entrusting your health and your hard-earned florins or shillings to? The medical marketplace of the Renaissance was a crowded and often confusing landscape, populated by a diverse cast of characters ranging from highly educated, university-trained physicians and skilled, guild-certified apothecaries to itinerant healers, folk herbalists, and outright charlatans or quacks. Navigating this maze to find reliable medical care was a significant challenge for anyone seeking relief from illness. The line between legitimate practitioner and persuasive fraudster could be exceedingly blurry. At the top of the medical hierarchy were the university-trained physicians. These men, and they were almost exclusively men in formal practice, had undergone years of rigorous study, primarily focused on the classical texts of Galen, Hippocrates, and Avicenna. They were learned scholars, adept at diagnosis based on humoral theory, observing your complexion, taking your pulse, examining your urine, a key diagnostic tool, often displayed in a special flask, and skilled in prescribing complex remedies. However, they generally did not dispense medicines themselves. That was the job of the apothecary. Nor did they typically engage in surgery, which was considered a lower status manual craft, often performed by barber surgeons. So, your physician would diagnose you, write a lengthy prescription in Latin full of complex symbols and abbreviations, naturally known, and send you off to the apothecary to have it filled. He was the brain, the apothecary the hands, a bit like an architect and a master builder. The apothecary, as we've seen, was a craftsman skilled in the preparation and dispensing of these prescribed medicines. To become a master apothecary, one usually had to undergo a long apprenticeship, learning to identify, source, store, and compound a vast range of materia medica. In many cities, apothecaries were organized into powerful guilds that regulated training, quality standards at least in theory, and pricing. They were respected members of the community, their shops serving as important social and medical hubs. While they weren't supposed to diagnose or prescribe in the same way as physicians, in practice, many people, especially those who couldn't afford a physician's fees, would go directly to the apothecary for advice and remedies for common ailments. A mainstream historical fact is that the roles of physician and apothecary were often strictly delineated by professional organizations and licensing bodies. Though jurisdictional disputes and overlaps were common, then you had the barber surgeons. These practitioners handled the more hands-on, and often messy, aspects of medical care, bloodletting, a cornerstone of humoral therapy, lancing boils, treating wounds and fractures, pulling teeth, and performing amputations and other surgical procedures. Their training was primarily through apprenticeship rather than university education, and their status was generally lower than that of physicians. Though a skilled surgeon was certainly valued, their shops, often marked by a red and white striped pole symbolizing blood and bandages, were places most people hoped to avoid but were grateful for in an emergency. Beyond these more formally recognized practitioners, there was a whole spectrum of irregular healers. Folk herbalists, often women, possessed extensive traditional knowledge of local plants and their uses, passed down through generations. Midwives, also overwhelmingly women, attended childbirths and provided care for mothers and newborns. Itinerant tooth drawers, oculists, eye doctors, and stonecutters who performed risky operations to remove bladder stones would travel from town to town, often setting up stalls in marketplaces and using flamboyant techniques to attract customers. And then there were the quacks, or charlatans. These were individuals who preyed on the sick and desperate, selling bogus remedies, miracle cures, and useless trinkets, often with outlandish claims and theatrical presentations. They might hawk universal panaceas, love potions, or elixirs of youth, using persuasive rhetoric and fabricated testimonials. Distinguishing a genuine, if perhaps misguided, practitioner from an outright fraud could be very difficult for the average person. Remember that crocodile dung sunscreen we talked about the Renaissance had its equivalent in snake oil and powdered unicorn horn, sold with a wink and a hefty price tag. Now, for a quirky tidbit, some quacks developed elaborate stage personas and employed assistants or shills to drum up business and prove the efficacy of their cures. They might perform mock surgical operations, use sleight of hand, or even have accomplices in the crowd feign miraculous recoveries after taking their potion. It was street theater as much as medicine. Historians still argue about the relative numbers and influence of these different types of practitioners. While physicians and apothecaries represented the official medical system, how many people, especially in rural areas or among the urban poor, relied primarily on folk healers or fell prey to charlatans? So, when you sought medical help in the Renaissance, you were entering a complex and often unregulated marketplace of healing. Your choice of practitioner and the potion or treatment you received could depend as much on your social status, your wealth, and your local connections as it did on the nature of your ailment. It was a world where profound learning coexisted with profound ignorance, and where genuine compassion could be found alongside cynical exploitation. Choosing wisely could literally be a matter of life or death. You've explored the apothecary's shelves, marveled at the strange ingredients, and perhaps even dodged a few charlatans in the marketplace. But what if you weren't just an ordinary citizen seeking a cure for your ugh? What if you were a person of immense wealth and power? A king, a queen, a duke, or a powerful merchant prince? The potions and remedies available to the elite of Renaissance society were often even more elaborate, more exotic, and certainly more eye-wateringly expensive than those for the common folk. Their medicine chest would have been filled with costly ingredients sourced from the farthest corners of the known world, all promising to preserve their precious health, prolong their lives, and enhance their royal or noble vigor. The physicians and apothecaries who served the ruling classes were often the most renowned and highest-paid practitioners of their day. They had access to the rarest ingredients and the most complex recipes. A potion concocted for a monarch would not be a simple herbal infusion. It would likely be a sophisticated compound, perhaps containing dozens of components, including powdered pearls, ground gemstones, gold leaf, and the most exotic spices and resins. The aim was not just to cure illness, but also to maintain the ruler's strength, fertility, and majestic aura. After all, the health of the monarch was often seen as intrinsically linked to the health of the state. No pressure on the royal physician. Then, if the king gets a sniffle, it's not just a cold, it's a national crisis. More powdered unicorn horn. Stat, one of the most sought-after ingredients for elite remedies was, as we've touched upon, potable gold aurum potabile. This alchemically prepared solution or suspension of gold was believed to be a universal panacea, a life-extending elixir, and a powerful cordial. Its preparation was shrouded in secrecy and incredibly expensive, making it the ultimate status symbol in medicinal consumption. Queens might take it to enhance their beauty, kings to bolster their vitality. Whether it did anything beyond drain the royal treasury is highly debatable, but its golden allure was irresistible. A mainstream historical fact is that many Renaissance rulers, including figures like Queen Elizabeth II of England and Emperor Rudolph II of the Holy Roman Empire, employed alchemists and physicians who experimented with and prescribed such metallic and gemstone-based remedies. Pearls, as mentioned, were another favorite for aristocratic potions. They were believed to strengthen the heart, calm palpitations, and purify the blood. They would be painstakingly ground into a fine powder and mixed into cordials or electuaries. Coral was similarly used. Emeralds, sapphires, and rubies also found their way into these elite concoctions. Each gemstone thought to possess specific virtues based on its color and perceived properties. Imagine swallowing a potion laced with the dust of your own crown jewels. It's a whole new level of conspicuous consumption, or perhaps conspicuous medication. Exotic animal products, already expensive, became even more so when destined for a royal stomach. Ambergris, a waxy substance produced in the digestive system of sperm whales and found floating in the ocean or washed ashore, was an incredibly valuable ingredient. It has a complex, sweet, earthy aroma and was used as a fixative in perfumes, but also as a stimulant, aphrodisiac, and remedy for various ailments in elite potions. Bezoar stones, hardened, undigested masses found in the stomachs of certain animals like goats or antelopes, were highly prized as universal antidotes to poison, often worn in elaborate settings as amulets and also powdered for medicinal use. A king, constantly worried about assassination by poison, a legitimate concern in those days, would likely have a bezoar stone or two in his private medicine chest. Now for a quirky tidbit, some royal remedies were not just about the ingredients, but also about the elaborate rituals surrounding their preparation and administration. A potion for the king might need to be prepared at a specific astrological conjunction, using specially consecrated vessels, and administered by a trusted physician while reciting particular incantations or prayers. This added to the mystique and the perceived power of the medicine, blending pharmacology with a healthy dose of ceremonial magic. Historians still argue about the psychological impact of such elaborate and costly remedies on royal patients. Did the sheer expense and theatricality of the treatment contribute significantly to a placebo effect, making them feel better simply because they believed they were receiving the most powerful medicine money could buy? So, the potions destined for the palaces and castles of Renaissance Europe were often a world away from the simpler herbal remedies of the common folk. They were a testament to the wealth, power, and anxieties of the ruling class, their desire for longevity, their fear of poison, and their belief that only the rarest and most precious substances could safeguard their exalted lives. Whether these diamond-dusted, gold-laced, ambergris-infused concoctions actually worked any better than a peasant's brew of chamomile and honey is a question that modern science would likely answer with a resounding and very expensive-sounding no. We've explored a dazzling and sometimes disturbing array of ingredients in those Renaissance potions, from humble herbs and powdered pearls to bits of mummy and exotic spices. But lurking within this vast pharmacopoeia was a category of substances that required particular skill, immense caution, and a hefty dose of bravery or perhaps recklessness on the part of both the apothecary and the patient poisons. Yes, you heard that right. Many substances known to be deadly in larger quantities were deliberately employed in carefully one-hoped measured doses as powerful medicines, operating on the principle that the dose makes the poison, a concept famously articulated by Paracelsus but understood in practice long before him. It was a perilous tightrope walk between cure and catastrophe. We've already touched upon some of these toxic tonics: mercury, arsenic, and antimony. These metallic poisons were mainstays in the treatment of serious diseases like syphilis, mercury being the go-to, Despite its horrific side effects or as potent purgatives antimony to induce violent vomiting and diarrhea, aimed at expelling corrupt humors. Arsenic, in minute doses, was sometimes included in tonics to strengthen the patient or treat persistent skin conditions. The line between a therapeutic dose and a lethal one was terrifyingly thin, and accidental poisonings, or deliberate ones disguised as medicine, were not uncommon. It makes you wonder how many Renaissance natural causes deaths were actually due to an overenthusiastic apothecary. Just a little more mercury. That should clear up his sniffles and his pulse permanently. But the list of medicinal poisons didn't end with metals. Certain plants known for their extreme toxicity were also used, albeit with great trepidation. Hellebore, for instance, both black and white varieties, was a famously potent purgative and emetic, used since antiquity to treat madness by violently expelling the black bile thought to cause melancholy or mania and other severe conditions. An overdose could easily be fatal, causing cardiac arrest. Its use required an expert hand and a desperate patient. Aconite, also known as monkshood or wolfsbane, another incredibly poisonous plant, was sometimes used externally in ointments for nerve pain, but its internal use was fraught with extreme danger. A mainstream historical fact is that Renaissance physicians and apothecaries were well aware of the poisonous nature of many of these substances, and their texts often contained explicit warnings about dosage and preparation. Though accidents and misjudgments still occurred, opium, derived from the opium poppy, while a highly effective painkiller and sedative, is also, of course, a potent narcotic with a high potential for addiction and overdose. Its inclusion in so many Renaissance remedies, from simple cough syrups to the complex theriac, meant that many patients were essentially being treated with a powerful opioid. While it undoubtedly provided symptomatic relief, it also led to dependence and, in some cases, accidental or intentional death from overdose. The comfort it offered came at a significant price. Nux vomica. The seeds of a tree native to Southeast Asia contains strychnine, a powerful poison that causes muscle convulsions and death by asphyxiation, in very small doses. However, it was used as a stimulant, a tonic for the nervous system, and to treat paralysis. Again, the margin for error was virtually non-existent. Even cantharides, or Spanish fly, dried beetles known for their supposed aphrodisiac properties due to causing irritation and inflammation of the urinary tract, which was misinterpreted as sexual arousal, were also used internally as a diuretic or externally as a blistering agent. They are, however, highly toxic to the kidneys. Romance or renal failure. A tough choice. Now, for a quirky tidbit, the very concept of a poison versus a medicine was often fluid, depending not just on dosage but also on intent and the perceived nature of the illness. Some believed that powerful diseases required equally powerful, even dangerous remedies to overcome them. It was a kind of fight fire with fire approach. Furthermore, the symbolic power of a known poison, if tamed or corrected by the apothecary's art, could enhance its perceived efficacy in the eyes of the patient. This stuff is so strong it could kill a horse, so it must be good for my agu. Historians still argue about the ethical considerations and the actual patient outcomes of using such overtly toxic substances. Were physicians and apothecaries knowingly taking huge risks? Or did they genuinely believe, based on their theories and limited empirical evidence, that the potential benefits outweighed the dangers? So, when that Renaissance potion was handed to you, it might have contained not just the gentle power of herbs or the noble influence of gemstones, but also a calculated dose of something truly deadly. The apothecary wasn't just mixing ingredients, he was often dancing with death, relying on ancient recipes, personal experience, and perhaps a prayer to ensure his potent brew would heal rather than harm. It certainly gives a new meaning to the phrase, "take your medicine." You'd want to be very sure of your apothecary's skills and perhaps have your affairs in order. just in case. For centuries, the peculiar potions of the Renaissance, with their complex blend of humoral theory, herbal lore, animal parts, mineral magic, and sometimes outright poison, held sway over the medical landscape. But the Renaissance itself was an era of profound intellectual awakening, a time when old authorities began to be questioned and new ways of understanding the world started to emerge. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, then with gathering momentum. The foundations of traditional Galenic medicine and its associated pharmacopoeia began to crumble under the weight of new scientific discoveries, ushering in an age of doubt and a more empirical approach to healing. The reign of the mystical, multi-ingredient potion was drawing to a close. One of the most significant shifts was the rise of observational science and a renewed emphasis on anatomy and physiology. Artists and physicians like Leonardo da Vinci and Andreas Vesalius, through direct dissection of human cadavers, often a controversial practice, began to create more accurate maps of the human body. Vesalius's groundbreaking illustrated anatomical atlas, De Humani Corporis Fabrica, on the fabric of the human body, published in 1543, directly challenged many of Galen's anatomical assertions, which had been based largely on animal dissections and had gone unquestioned for centuries. A mainstream historical fact is that Vesalius's work, by demonstrating errors in Galen's anatomy, began to undermine the infallibility of ancient medical authorities, paving the way for a more critical and empirical approach to medicine. If Galen was wrong about the structure of the heart or the liver, could he also be wrong about the humors and their supposed imbalances? The invention of the microscope in the late 16th and early 17th centuries opened up entirely new, previously invisible worlds. Thinkers like Antony van Leeuwenhoek began to observe animalcules microorganisms in water and bodily fluids. While the germ theory of disease was still far in the future, these discoveries hinted at complexities in the causes of illness that simply couldn't be explained by humoral imbalances alone. It was like discovering a whole new cast of characters in the drama of disease. Characters that Galen had never even dreamed of. In the realm of chemistry, the work of figures like Robert Boyle in the 17th century began to move alchemy towards a more rigorous, experimental science of chemistry. Boyle challenged Paracelsus's three principles: salt, sulfur, mercury, and Aristotle's four elements, proposing instead the concept of chemical elements as fundamental, irreducible substances. This new understanding of matter had profound implications for pharmacy, suggesting that the properties of medicines might be due to specific chemical constituents rather than vague virtues or humoral qualities. The idea of isolating active ingredients, pioneered in a rudimentary way by Paracelsus, started to gain more traction. It's the slow dawning of the idea that perhaps there isn't a spirit of wormwood, but rather a specific chemical compound in wormwood that has an effect. This growing scientific understanding led to increasing skepticism about some of the more outlandish traditional remedies. Did powdered mummy really cure bruises? Did unicorn horn truly neutralize poison? As empirical evidence failed to support such claims, and as the underlying theories like the doctrine of signatures began to look more like quaint superstitions than scientific principles, these ingredients started to fall out of favor, at least among more progressive physicians and apothecaries. The more complex and bizarre cure-alls like theriac, with its dozens of ingredients, also came under scrutiny. What if only one or two of those components were actually doing anything, and the rest were just expensive, useless, or even harmful additions? Now, for a quirky tidbit, even as new scientific ideas were emerging, old beliefs died hard. There was often a considerable lag between a scientific discovery and its impact on everyday medical practice. Many physicians and apothecaries, trained in the old ways, continued to prescribe and prepare traditional remedies well into the 18th century and even beyond, sometimes alongside newer, more scientific medicines. It was a period of overlap and sometimes confused coexistence. Imagine a doctor prescribing both a traditional herbal concoction to balance your humors and a newly isolated chemical salt. just to cover all the bases. A little bit of Galen, a little bit of Boyle. That should sort you out. Historians still argue about the pace of this transition. Was it a sudden revolution or a very slow, gradual evolution, with many false starts and cul-de-sacs along the way? So, the intellectual and scientific ferment of the late Renaissance and the early modern period began to chip away at the edifice of traditional potion making. The mystical and the magical were slowly giving way to the measurable and the material. The apothecary's art was beginning its long transformation into the science of pharmacy. The peculiar potions, born of ancient theories and arcane ingredients, were starting to look less like potent remedies and more like relics of a bygone era, fascinating in their complexity, but increasingly suspect in their efficacy. The age of reason was dawning, and it was casting a rather harsh light on that jar of dried vipers, the dim, aromatic apothecary shop of the Renaissance, with its crocodile hanging from the ceiling and its jars filled with powdered mummy and viper flesh. Seems a world away from our modern, brightly lit pharmacies with their neatly packaged pills and evidence-based prescriptions. The journey from those peculiar, often perilous kind of potions to the targeted, regulated medicines of today has been a long, fascinating, and sometimes rather bumpy one. Yet, as we conclude our exploration, it's worth reflecting on the legacy of these Renaissance brews and what enduring echoes, if any, they have left in the world of medicine. One of the most obvious legacies is in the realm of herbal medicine. While the humoral theory and the doctrine of signatures that often guided their use have been discarded, many of the plants used by Renaissance apothecaries do, in fact, possess genuine pharmacological properties. Modern science has isolated active compounds from numerous traditional medicinal herbs. Think of digitalis from foxglove for heart conditions, though foxglove was also known to be toxic and used with caution in the Renaissance. Salicin from willowbark aspirin's ancestor, or morphine from opium poppies. The empirical observations of generations of herbalists and apothecaries, even if interpreted through flawed theoretical lenses, sometimes led them to effective natural remedies. Today, there's a renewed interest in pharmacognosy, the study of medicines derived from natural sources, and researchers continue to investigate traditional plant-based remedies for new therapeutic leads. So, that Renaissance herbal potion wasn't all just wishful thinking. Sometimes they stumbled upon gold, or at least a useful alkaloid. The alchemical and Paracelsian emphasis on extracting essences and using chemically prepared substances, while often leading to the use of dangerous toxins like mercury and antimony, also laid some of the crucial groundwork for the development of chemistry and pharmacology. The idea of isolating active principles, of understanding the chemical composition of medicines, and of the dose-response relationship, the dose makes the poison, are fundamental concepts in modern drug development. Paracelsus, for all his eccentricity, was a bridge figure, pushing medicine away from purely botanical polypharmacy towards a more chemical understanding. He might have been a bit too enthusiastic about arsenic tonics, but his core idea about specific chemical agents for specific diseases was revolutionary. The very role of the apothecary, that skilled compounder of medicines, evolved into the modern pharmacist. While today's pharmacist is less likely to be grinding unicorn horns or distilling potable gold, one hopes, the core functions of dispensing medication, advising patients, and ensuring the quality and safety of remedies have their roots in the apothecary's craft. The pharmacopoeias of the Renaissance, those vast recipe books of medicinal preparations, were precursors to the standardized national and international pharmacopoeias that guide drug manufacturing today. A mainstream historical fact is that the meticulous record-keeping and recipe formulation seen in Renaissance apothecaries contributed to the gradual standardization of medicines and the development of pharmacy as a distinct scientific profession. However, perhaps the most important lesson from the era of peculiar potions is one of humility and the importance of critical thinking and empirical evidence in medicine. The Renaissance reliance on ancient authority, often in the face of contradictory evidence. and the prevalence of theories based on sympathetic magic or superficial resemblances serve as a stark reminder of how easily well-intentioned medical practices can go astray. The often harmful or ineffective nature of many Renaissance remedies underscores the vital role of the scientific method. Observation, hypothesis, experimentation, and rigorous testing in developing safe and effective treatments. We've come a long way from prescribing beaver gland for hysteria, and that's largely thanks to embracing a more skeptical and evidence-based approach. Now for a final, quirky thought for all their strangeness. Those Renaissance potions often involved a highly personalized approach to medicine. The physician and apothecary considered the patient's individual humoral balance, their temperament, their diet, even the astrological conditions. While the basis was flawed, this holistic, individualized perspective is something that modern medicine, with its sometimes overly standardized protocols, occasionally seeks to recapture, albeit through the lens of genetics and personalized diagnostics rather than planetary influences. Historians still argue about whether the placebo effect played a dominant role in the perceived efficacy of many Renaissance potions. Given the often dramatic ingredients and the profound belief system surrounding them, it's highly likely that the power of suggestion was a very significant, if unquantifiable, a component of any cure. So, as the flickering lamplight of that Renaissance apothecary shop begins to dim in our imaginations, and the pungent aroma of exotic herbs and strange concoctions starts to fade, we leave behind a world of medicine that was both wondrously imaginative and terrifyingly imprecise. It was an era of bold experimentation and slavish adherence to tradition, of profound compassion and sometimes lethal ignorance. The memory of those ancient humors, the blood, the phlegm, the choler, and the melancholy, can now gently recede, replaced by a quiet appreciation for the immense journey medicine has undertaken. The clinking of glass vials, the rhythmic pounding of the pestle in the mortar, the hushed recitation of arcane recipes, all these now soften into the silence of the past. You can let go of the fear of inadvertently ingesting powdered mummy or a draft of potable gold. The quest for health and healing is an ancient and ongoing human endeavor. And though the potions and practices of the Renaissance may seem peculiar to us now, they represent a vital, if sometimes unsettling, chapter in that long story. As you drift towards sleep, may your own well-being be assured by remedies far gentler and far more certain than those brewed in the crucibles of a bygone age. Rest now in the comfort of modern knowledge and sweet dreams.